Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
We begin with policy in Washington. Congressional leaders have unveiled a plan to fund parts of the federal government through the end of September. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
It's $436 billion and covers about a quarter of the overall government spending. It represents the first real progress toward resolving ideological clashes, but at the same time, does not address the sharply partisan issues that keep pushing last-minute shutdown anxiety. It does not address Pentagon spending, for example. It does include, though, a provision to prevent oil sales from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve to China. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thank you. Well, turning to the presidential race, Nikki Haley just won her first Republican primary. It's in the District of Columbia, where, with 100% of the votes counted, Haley took 62.8% to former President Trump's 33.3%. Before the win, Haley hinted she might stay in the race all the way to the Republican National Convention in July.
If the people want to see me go forward, they'll show it. They'll show it in their votes. They'll show it in their donations. They'll show it in the fact that they want us to continue to go forward.
And Nikki Haley spoke on NBC's Meet the Press, heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio. Her win in the D.C. primary gives her 19 convention delegates, bringing her total to 43. Former President Trump has racked up 244 delegates so far. He's likely to pick up many more when 15 states vote tomorrow and Super Tuesday.
Meanwhile, Karen, former President Trump could learn today whether the Supreme Court lets him appear on the Colorado ballot. The justices are expected to decide at least one case today. Signs are pointing to resolution of the Colorado case that threatened to kick Trump off some state ballots because of his efforts to overturn his 2020 election loss. Trump is challenging a Colorado Supreme Court decision that he is disqualified from being president again and ineligible for the state's primary tomorrow.
Well, turning to the Middle East now, Nathan, calls for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas are growing louder. Vice President Kamala Harris is now calling for a pause in the fighting in Gaza.
Let's get a ceasefire. Let's reunite the hostages with their families. And let's provide immediate relief to the people of Gaza.
Vice President Harris spoke in Selma, Alabama, a day after U.S. officials said Israel had essentially agreed to a 6-week ceasefire if Hamas hands over vulnerable hostages. Meanwhile, a new Gallup poll shows Americans are less favorable of both Israel and the Palestinian Authority since the Gaza war began. 58% say they have a positive view of Israel. That's down 10 percentage points since last year. Favorable views of the Palestinian Authority have dropped from 18 to 8%.
Now let's look toward outer space, Karen. SpaceX has successfully launched another Falcon 9 spacecraft from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The 1 cosmonaut and 3 astronauts on board are headed to the International Space Station. American astrobiologist and former NASA employee Keith Cowing says for SpaceX, incredible feats like this are becoming routine.
They're always exciting, but I'll be honest with you, these SpaceX things are starting to get a little boring, which is a good thing because we're at least now going from being scared every time we launch the crew to something that's approaching maybe not routine, but acceptable. And that's a good thing.
American astrobiologist Keith Cowing says after last night's launch, the spacecraft is expected to dock autonomously to the space station at about 3 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow morning.
Well, Nathan, turning to the markets now, for the first time, Japan's Nikkei 225 stock average surpassed 40,000. Investors around the world have been piling into Japan's biggest companies on improving shareholder returns, the weaker yen, and booming corporate profits.
And back on Wall Street, Karen, another firm is lifting its price target for U.S. stocks. We get that story from Bloomberg's Jeff Bellinger.
Bank of America's Savita Subramanian now expects the S&P 500 to end the year at 5,400. That is up from her earlier target of 5,000 and indicates about a 5% gain from Friday's close. She says indicators are flashing bullish signals on stronger earnings growth ahead and surprising profit margin resilience. B of A's 5,400 price target now ranks as one of the most bullish on Wall Street. Subramanian joins the ranks of Ed Yardeni Kenny of Yardeni Research and Jonathan Golub of UBS, who both hold the same year-end outlook. Jeff Bellinger, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Jeff, thanks. While stocks begin the week at record levels, Bitcoin is edging up near its all-time high. The cryptocurrency is trading above $65,000. Traders are betting on the price to soon cross the record of almost $69,000 reached during the COVID pandemic in November 2021. Bitcoin has jumped about 186% in the last 12 months, and right now it's at $65,100. We turn to the economy now, and interest rates will be in focus this week. Fed Chair Jay Powell is delivering congressional testimony this week. We get the latest with Bloomberg's John Tucker. John.
And Karen Powell is expected to double down on his message that there's no rush to cut interest rates. He delivers his semi-annual monetary policy testimony to a House committee Wednesday and then a Senate panel on Thursday. Powell and nearly all his colleagues have said in recent weeks that they can afford to be patient in deciding when to cut rates, given that the underlying strength in the U.S. economy. That cautious approach has been validated in recent weeks by data showing inflation picked up last month. Democrats in Congress likely to press the Fed chief on why officials are keeping borrowing costs so high. Well, the path of rates could affect the November election. John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, John, thank you. Now, in company news, we're watching shares of Macy's this morning. They're up nearly 14% in early trading. Investors are boosting their takeover bid for the retailer. That story from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
Back in January, Ark House Management and Brigade Capital offered $5.8 billion for Macy's, but the retailer rejected the bid, saying it lacked compelling value. Well, now Ark House and Brigade have boosted their offer by 14%. It's worth $6.6 billion. Per share, at $24, the latest bid is a 33% premium to Macy's closing price on Friday. And the investor group also disclosed equity partners in the proposed transaction, Fortress Investment Group and One Investment Management, U.S. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Doug, thanks. Well, in Asia, Chinese Premier Li Qiang will break tradition at the end of the National People's Congress. And Bloomberg Daybreak Asia anchor Brian Curtis has more from Hong Kong.
Premier Li will not hold a news briefing, killing a long-standing tradition. This will surely fan fears of a lack of openness by the Chinese leadership. It will be seen as diminishing access to information. In addition, a spokesperson said this will continue for the remainder of this term of the NPC. China will set a growth target for this year and what's likely to be a slight increase in deficit spending. But the thing is, we may not hear much about the reasoning behind it. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Brian, thank you. And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Congestion pricing is set up in London. Now the final set of MTA hearings about congestion pricing in Manhattan takes place today. The two final hearings are scheduled for 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. at the MTA headquarters. New York area residents will have another chance to share their thoughts on congestion pricing south of 60th Street. Most drivers and cars would pay a fee of at least $15. That's on top of paying the tolls to drive through the Lincoln or Holland tunnels. The plan is slated to begin in mid-June. U.S. military planes started dropping food aid into Gaza over the weekend. Former Marine fighter pilot Colonel Steve Ganyard explains the Air Force regularly makes airdrops to resupply U.S. Army units in the field.
Part of the Air Force crew's mission is being able to airdrop supplies. So in this case, it's not U.S. forces. Obviously, they're close to the ground, and so you need a permissive environment where people aren't shooting at you. Presumably, none of Hamas would be shooting at the U.S. while they were trying to deliver this aid.
Former pilot Steve Ganyard spoke to ABC. Authorities have ordered a nighttime curfew in an attempt to regain control of Haiti streets after an explosion of violence during the weekend, including gunmen from gangs overrunning the country's two biggest prisons and freeing their inmates. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy, one of the bipartisan senators who negotiated a border security deal that fell through after it failed to garner enough Republican support in the House, now urges Democrats to go on the offensive on immigration. Senator Murphy of Connecticut says he knows the reason he believes Republicans chose to back out of the deal.
Republicans blocked the bill because they knew only the legislation would be effective in controlling the border. They want the border to be out of control because it helps him politically, and they know the president has limits to what he can do through executive order.
Senator Murphy spoke on ABC's This Week, heard Sundays on Bloomberg. An unlucky family in Sullivan County, New York, had a dangerous moment just hours after they moved into a house. A home in Monticello is now condemned after the home exploded. Firefighters and police officers responded to the blast on Emily Street over the weekend. The family had just finished unpacking 2 U-Haul trucks and was heading for bed when suddenly the blast occurred.
I was laying down and all of a sudden the whole house went boom and shook and ran out the door. Spread what we couldn't go.
One person is hospitalized with burns. 8 others managed to get out of the house uninjured. The cause of the explosion believed to have stemmed from a gas leak in the basement. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Bard. This is Bloomberg Nathan.
Okay, Michael, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. Good morning, John Stashow.
Good morning, Nathan. The Knicks in Cleveland still without 3 injured starters. And then in the first minute, Jalen Brunson hurt his knee. They had to play without him. Still beat the Cavs, 107-98. Plenty of Knick heroes. Josh Hart played 45 minutes and a triple-double that included 19 rebounds. Deuce McBride came in for Brunson, never left. He played 47 minutes, 28 points for Dante DiVincenzo. Much-needed win for the Knicks, who had lost 7 of their previous 9. And the news on Brunson's knee injury is encouraging. A contusion. X-rays were negative. In Boston, the Celtics' 11th win in a row was their 3rd win of the season by 50 or more points. That's an NBA record. The Celtics over Golden State, 140-88. This game was 82-38 at halftime. College hoops, Seton Hall earlier in the season had that upset of UConn. The Huskies got revenge, beat the Pirates by 30, and that clinches the Big East regular season title for UConn. In Iowa, last home game for Caitlin Clark, yet another milestone, more points than Pete Maravich, so most points scored, male or female.
Like hard for me to wrap my head around everything that's going on. I think I'm just trying to soak in the moment. A record is a record. I don't want that to be the reason people remember me. I hope people remember me for the way I played with a smile on my face, my competitive fire. Sure, they can remember the wins, but also just like the fun me and my teammates had together.
And a big win for Clark in Iowa over second-ranked Ohio State. Top-ranked South Carolina beat Tennessee to complete a second consecutive 29-0 regular season. In Tampa, Yankees may have lost to the Tigers 7-2, but a Juan Soto home run first inning, which gave him 3 homers in his first 7 exhibition season at-bats. Also in Florida, they couldn't finish the Cognizant Golf. Will do so today. 25-year-old American Austin Eckroat has a one-shot lead. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Nathan?
All right, John, thank you. Now let's get right back to this market, starting a trading week at yet new all-time highs for the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ. Even Japan's Nikkei has crossed 40,000 for the first time ever. That's as we wait for more clues on the rate path from Fed Chair Jerome Powell this week. Let's bring in Jeffrey Yu for some market analysis, a senior EMEA market strategist at BNY Mellon. Jeff, it seems like Wall Street analysts are sort of falling all over themselves, raising their price targets for the S&P 500. Now we got Savita Subramanian at Bank of America raising to 5,400. Is there too much euphoria in this market? Is it well placed?
Well, good morning. I think it's often the case, no matter what benchmark you use, once expectations are raised and raised and raised, it becomes harder to hit them, right? So I think people will be querying that in the US, whereby if we look at other markets right now, expectations are relatively muted right now. So perhaps it's a bit easier to hit those expectations and surpass them. So I think for US assets in general to outperform up ahead may just be a bit trickier this month.
Interesting. So does that have you thinking that investors should be taking a little bit more of a look at markets outside the U.S. as we get into the balance of the year?
100%, right? So, 2 or 3 things here. Firstly, let's look at emerging markets. This is one area where we expected a new wave of asset allocation flow this year, especially in bonds, and to a lesser extent, equities, APAC, for example. If China and Japan, there's both potential for reflation, then earnings should continue to surprise the upside as well. And in Japan, even, I'm not just talking about the FX translation side of things. Latin America still offers you very, very good real rates, even relative to the US. So there are other opportunities out there. I just think the market, the US is outperforming. That exceptionalism narrative is fully in place, maybe even relative to high expectations as allocations may just be a bit too overweight right now.
Now, when it comes to the U.S. market, what are some of the headwinds, the major headwinds that are informing your view?
In addition to equity, in addition to equity expectations and being raised, I'm looking at our custodial data right now and flows into bond markets. And one interesting theme that we've established over the past month is if in November and December it was about getting out of front end due to expectations of rate cuts and moving into duration, right now we are seeing flows across the curve. So it's actually mattering even less to clients with regard to their bond exposure. Whatever part of the curve they're looking at, they just want to own dollars, a full stop. Not saying that this is a risky prospect right now. Again, the US is outperforming without excessive inflation. But again, this is where even if I look at equity and performance, allocations may just be a bit too extreme right now. It's almost as if no interest rate risk is being priced in. And that looks a bit excessive considering what's going to happen this year with respect to the economy.
I wonder what you made of Torsten Slok's call over to Apollo Management last week that the Fed might not be able to cut rates at all this year.
We will still take the other side of that. Inflation will continue to soften. If you look at some of the core items, I think that trend is in place. Central banks right now, they need to retain optionality. They will not pre-commit to cut, but they'll absolutely not pre-commit to say there won't be any cuts either this year. They will be data dependent, and right now we think data will continue to justify easing in Q2. So we will absolutely take the other side of that view.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available
Washington,
on your
Bloomberg
Amazon Alexa
106.1
devices.
in Boston, and
just say,
Bloomberg
Alexa,
960
play
in San
Bloomberg
Francisco.
1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.